complexity of the political and economic changes that we need to make to tackle the climate crisis can feel overwhelming. One way to bring that complexity within reach of practical action is to adopt a different lens to view the situation, the lens of systems, which is really another way of saying the science of patterns and their underlying rules. Every natural system and every human system can be thought of as a set of relationships that produce repeating patterns of behaviour. In the natural world, all living things are reliant on and continued by their relationships with each other. Like the rabbits, living in a field, eating the grass, and the foxes that prey on them. While individual creatures come and go, the pattern of eating and predation continue over time. In our human world, we also live in patterns of everyday life that persist over time. Take energy. You can trace the pattern of our reliance on fossil fuels all the way back to the early 1700s, when we started to make use of coal to fuel the Industrial Revolution. Now we have to leave that pattern behind and move to a new pattern based on clean power. This way of looking at the world reveals both what keeps a pattern in place and how new patterns can get going. At the heart of this way of thinking is the simple concept of a causal loop. This helps us see how patterns behave over time through cycles of cause and effect, whether a pattern strengthens or weakens caused by positive or negative feedback. As a population of rabbits increases, they reproduce more, raising the population, reproducing more, and so on. That's positive feedback, and we call it a reinforcing loop. But as the population increases, the predators turn up and start to reduce the number, limiting the growth. That's negative feedback, and we represent it with a balancing loop. New technologies usually benefit from positive feedbacks or learning by doing, in which the more we make something, the better we get at making it, so we can improve performance and reduce the price. This turns into a reinforcing loop. The better the performance, the more the demand from the market goes up, and the more we can invest to improve the performance, and so the demand goes up, and so it goes on in a reinforcing loop. This is common in technology development. In fact, improvement of this sort in products is so common that we almost take it for granted. Once a new approach gets into a loop like this, it can improve very quickly and soon replace the old pattern. Think of the big leap we made from horse-drawn to motorised transport, something previous generations couldn't have imagined. We need to make changes at this pace and scale to the patterns of our world today. Policy can play a big part in getting this sort of dynamic of change going for the new solutions we need, creating a reinforcing loop of ambition. For example, when businesses in a sector commit to zero carbon targets and start investing and innovating, they embolden policymakers. And when policymakers set the regulatory framework to drive towards zero carbon, they incentivize the private sector. This ambition loop can draw in resources, raise ambition, and accelerate change. As well as reinforcing loops that drive things along, we need to pay attention to the balancing loops of negative feedback that hold them back. Nothing can grow forever, so there is always something that creates a pushback. That might be saturation of the market or the limits of technology, but it can also be unintended aspects of policy that tend to slow down or prevent change. For example, carbon pricing is a tool for driving down carbon emissions, but some approaches are less effective than others because of negative feedback effects from balancing loops. This example shows the importance of system thinking to effective policy. In classical economics, there is no difference between the two main approaches to carbon pricing: carbon taxes or cap and trade. But modelling with causal loops shows they have very different effects. The cap and trade approach sets a cap on the allowable emissions in a sector, which can be lowered over time. Permits for emitting carbon are available up to the total of the cap, and businesses have to buy enough permits to cover their emissions. So that is an attractive way to link policy to targets to reduce emissions, because the cap on available permits controls the allowable emissions. There is a market in the permits, and when a business lowers its emissions, it can sell its permits to someone else who needs them. But when they do this, they are also lowering the demand for permits overall, and the price will drop. So the innovation by one player lowers the incentive to change for the others. Looking at the situation dynamically with causal loops reveals this sort of self-limiting negative feedback effect and can help point to alternative approaches that are likely to be more effective. For example, a fixed carbon tax does not create a negative feedback, and so is likely to create change faster than a cap-and-trade scheme. A subsidy for renewables also creates many positive feedbacks, and so is likely to be even more effective. In any part of the economy or society that we are trying to change, there are usually many positive and negative feedback loops all interacting with each other. Together, these can produce all kinds of behaviour: bubbles, crashes, stability, oscillations, growth, collapse, and transitions from one pattern to another. Causal loops can be used to explore these relationships, help us avoid unhelpful negative effects, and capture the power of positive feedback. If you want to jump in, visit futurestewards.com where you can learn more and get started.